The Invincible War. A scary time for Mark and honestly everybody who was present on Earth. Having a ton of different Mark Graysons, aka a ton of different Invincibles, invading this Earth from alternate dimensions was a scary, scary thing. Every last one of them possessing a superhuman abilities of strength, flight, speed, enhanced durability, and even some brutal combat styles of basically fighting. These variants of Invincibles wipe out numerous heroes. They devastate entire cities before truly being stopped. But there are some heroes in the Invincible universe that were able to take out different versions of Mark, or different versions of Invincible. I think we all came to the conclusion that these versions of Mark Grayson or Invincible weren't in a technicality stronger than Mark the original, or the Mark we know, in general. Now, it might sound odd to say that there are various different Invincibles that are actually weaker than Mark by a decent margin, but we would have to make an assumption that these Marks or these Invincibles didn't go through the process of training that the Mark that we know went through. They wouldn't have had to dealt with Anissa coming down and fighting against them and threatening them and so on and so forth, leading to a montage of just full-on training. Obviously, our Mark did have to go through that, so he was a good bit, a large bit stronger than normal. So these Mark Graysons, yes, are more brutal and do not hold back, but they are also weaker in terms of physical capabilities, in terms of training and stuff like that. Now, I'm not diminishing what they could possibly do, even though some of these Marks definitely fall short of what many of us would thought or could think that they would possibly have done. But the real question is, could one specific person survive the Invincible War? And that's what we're here to talk about today. And that person that we're actually talking about is the one and only Homelander. Arguably, if not guaranteed, the strongest person in the boys universe. Obviously, we don't know every single aspect of what's going to happen in the Amazon Prime TV show, but if you include the comics and stuff like that, Homelander in general is the strongest person in the boys universe. Now, the real question is, though, is his strength, does it really translate to the world of Invincible? I think the short answer is no. And the idea of could Homelander survive the Invincible War is probably a resounding no. Now, of course, we have to have a video, so I'm going to be kind of playing both sides here and talking about various ways I can see either him losing or him possibly surviving. And I want to make that very clear, surviving, because that's a very big clue to know that it's not necessarily he could walk into this and just win. And that really leads us into the first aspect of the Invincible War, Homelander versus all the Invincibles. Now, for one, he would stand no chance if he had to fend off, aka fight all of the Invincibles. Even if the Invincibles were deciding, hey, you know what, you're gonna go up first. No, you're gonna go up first. And they go one-on-one with Homelander, and they do that over and over and over again. But the thing is, we've seen pretty quickly, especially in the animated show of Invincible, that they don't have a problem with necessarily teaming up. We obviously see Hooded Mark and also Omni-Man Invincible face off with Adam Eve and are Invincible. Them going basically 2v2 against them proves that not necessarily they're okay with having the upper hand on like a 2 versus 1, but they kind of do, right? They kind of are okay with fighting somewhat together or helping each other out to an extent. So the idea of basically Homelander facing off with a ton of different versions of Invincible in a 1 versus 1, does he have a chance? Sure. I think there's different versions of Invincible that he could genuinely take on. We saw some of the versions of Invincible die in some very interesting ways and very, let's just say, less threatening ways. So the idea of Homelander being able to take out some of them, it might make sense, or at least take out one of them. It might make sense. But in terms of if 2 of them teamed up on him at once, it wouldn't even be fair. Like, I want to make it very clear, it wouldn't even be fair. And this is me giving Homelander just a little bit of a push, right? I'm giving him a little bit much because honestly, there are versions of Invincible that yes, he could defeat, but there's no way of really and truly knowing how much stronger he really would be against them. But I genuinely believe that with a more kind of brutal version of Invincible, Homelander would take insane amounts of damage, like insane amounts of damage. Because even if he can defeat one, I guarantee you that one Invincible would do an absurd amount of horrible infliction to Homelander himself, and it would lead to him being basically out of the fight against other Invincibles and basically killed instantly. Now, you might be wondering, well, what about the other versions of what could possibly happen in this could Homelander survive the Invincible War? Well, I'm glad you asked. Well, I asked myself. That's beyond the point. Now, really, Homelander being in the world of Invincible is also another point of contention. Having him be in the world of Invincible would be far different than having him in the world of the boys, as the Invincible invasion could potentially happen, right? Him being in the world of Invincible might lead him to have a better chance against everybody, because Homelander still would have literally Invincible there, the one we know, would have your Adam Eves, would have some of the other marks that normally die be defeated, but he would just be put in a situation where he would probably have to at least defeat one of them. And I want to say this very, very, very boldly and very highly, that he has to pray that one of these versions of Invincible that he faces off with are very weak, whereas on the weaker side and on, well, the side of the one of the Invincibles that passed on to the next life. Because if it's not, and it's an Invincible that really handled his business properly, I mean, we could be talking about a pretty damn dead Homelander in a very spectacular way. Because Homelander himself, yes, with all the help of the other people and all that stuff, it would still make it very difficult for him to actually defeat one of these Invincibles. But another thing that really needs to be considered when involving Homelander is his ego. His ego is massive, and if it's still the same when he goes to the Invincible universe, I mean, it would honestly make for one of the greatest weaknesses he could possibly have. Genuinely, his ego, to thinking that he's stronger, he's better, and he's faster, and he's all these things more than these versions of evil Mark Grayson. Oh, it could get really bad, like really bad, really fast. And this still kind of extends with what I'm talking about him being in the Invincible universe, because if he goes and he fights one of the Mark Graysons and he doesn't take it 100% seriously right off the rip and thinks, you know what, I'm Homelander, I'm better than you, you know, like you won't be able to touch me. Oh, he's going to find a rude awakening very quickly, because these versions of Invincible are brutal, man. They are brutal. They are disgusting, and they will do anything to hurt you. So really, if he's not careful, he could genuinely get hurt so badly that he's thrown so far off his game that he gets just killed immediately. And that's something that could genuinely happen in the case of Homelander. If he lets his ego just get the best of him in any way, right? In a way of maybe he defeats one and then goes on and thinks, you know what, I'm gonna go kill the rest. I'm gonna go defeat the rest. Well, that's a bad idea, a really bad idea. And that version, he would not be surviving. So I want to say it with all chest. If we get a Homelander that either faces off with all the Invincibles at once, obviously, he's not winning that. So by himself, he's not going to win this Invincible kind of war. Now, 2, if he is in the Invincible universe and he faces off with an Invincible and maybe some more, he might have a better chance. Actually, no, I take it back. He would definitely have a better chance of surviving depending on the Invincible he faces off with. Now, I will say this, though. If his ego gets in the way, we could be talking about, well, a repeat of what we just talked about in terms of him losing and not surviving the Invincible War. Because if he lets that ego get the best of him and he decides, you know what, I'm going to keep flying around and I'm going to keep finding these other Invincibles and I'm going to keep trying to fight them, ooh, it could go really bad really fast. But we also have another version where I believe he could possibly survive. Now, this version is more to do with the fact of him being a coward. Now, I'm not saying that he technically would just run away from the fight and not fight at all, but him being added into this universe, he technically wouldn't have to fight them for them to have a quote-unquote good ending, you could say, right? Maybe he goes and sees that these versions of Invincible are fighting and this and that, and he realizes like these guys are really powerful and are no joke. Like they are destroying like and obliterating cities and continents and stuff like that. Maybe he decides he fights the first one with a bunch of fellow heroes and then they never see him again. I mean, he just disappears. He's gone. Then there you go. He would in turn survive the Invincible War, because you would still have Mark Grayson, you would still have all these other heroes that did their due diligence, and then you would eventually have Angstrom Levy send the rest of the Invincibles off to an alternate universe, forcing them to be stuck there. So he technically would survive. Now, with all that said, that is the more cowardly way of handling things, and I think a lot of us are thinking like, well, Homelander's ego would be too big for him to actually do something like that, and Homelander's just thinking and kind of idea of himself would make him think like, you know what, I'm stronger, I'm better, I'm definitely going to, you know, beat these guys pretty easily, and that is what's going to truly get him in massive trouble. But I think overall, and personally, I wouldn't even say I know overall, Homelander's powers and his limits in strength and durability and combat experience, because that's a big thing too, and also mentality, is just not good enough, right? It's not good enough for to take on the Invincible War, even if he gets help massively throughout this time. So what are the chances of him actually surviving? I would give him a not very high chance. If I would have to say, I would go more 80% chance of him not surviving and more 20% chance of him actually surviving, because I don't want to say that Homelander is weak in comparison to them, because he's not necessarily weak in comparison to them in the Invincible War. I think there is some merit to say that Homelander could possibly hold his own against some of the Invincibles. Genuinely, some of them. Now, we are talking about a bunch of marks that don't hold back, a bunch of marks that are really powerful. So Homelander, if he's not really prepared, he could get caught lacking pretty damn hard. But at the same time, I mean, yes, he might hold his own against certain Invincibles, or he might hold his own for a short time against some of the stronger Invincibles, but that lack of real battle experience would hurt them hurt him massively. And like I've said before, against an army of them, he literally stands no chance, right? The sheer number of Invincibles would make it so that combat would essentially be nothing. We would literally just watch him get beat senseless until he was nothingness on the ground. So, of course, what would he have to do to survive? In the short term, if Homelander fled immediately, avoided direct combat, stuff like that, maybe, you know, kept his distance, I could see that potentially happening. Now, if he stayed and fought, he would legitimately be torn apart by these Invincibles in this war. I mean, legitimately, his arrogance would likely prevent him from allowing himself to retreat, and it would obviously lead to his death. Now, there would be another version of this that we could potentially talk about, and that's with Homelander, yes, Homelander, going head-to-head in the Invincible War with the, I believe, 18 evil Mark Graysons with the universe or the world of the boys. Now, with that said, I don't want to talk about that, because that just might be a video we do where we talk about if the boys universe could survive the Invincible War. Now, that's definitely something we're going to be talking about in the near future for a different video. But I think in conclusion, I think all of you probably who have watched this video are thinking you probably didn't need to allow this to go about 15 minutes long, because you did answer the question in the first couple minutes. And I agree. But I wanted to kind of get all of my thoughts out there on if Homelander could survive, and different versions on how he could potentially survive in, you know, that very, very small chance of him obviously surviving. Now, like I said, in conclusion, Homelander would not survive the Invincible War. He just lacks the strength, the endurance, and honestly, the strategic thinking he would really need to face not only an army of Invincibles, but also just a brutal and also just absolutely ruthless different versions of Invincibles Could he delay? Maybe. But at the end of the day, he would just be delaying the inevitable, but it just wouldn't last long enough, and he would definitely not be able to survive the Invincible War unless he did some very cowardly things and or things that, well, Homelander normally doesn't do, and that's kind of run away, hide, and or kind of not think that you're going to be the strongest in the face of some of the most powerful beings out there in the universe. Now, with that said, I would love to hear what you guys have to say. Do you think Homelander could survive the Invincible War? Do you think me saying 80-20, like 80% of him dying or 80% of him not surviving, 20% chance of him surviving is too much credit to Homelander? Do you think it's not enough credit to Homelander? I would love to hear what you guys have to say about it, and I would love to hear overall what you guys have to say about the video. Make sure to show some love, leave a like, leave a sub, leave a comment down below, and if you want to see the Boys Universe versus the comment section below. War, with that said, though, make sure to leave a like, leave a sub, and all that good stuff. And with all that said, if you enjoyed this video, YouTube believes you'll enjoy this one, so might as well go check it out.